In this episode, we're going to make 3 loaves of bread using 3 different off-grid methods. Come along, see how we do stuff. Alright, so this is our bread episode, and maybe the first of many. And in this episode we're going to be baking 3 loaves of bread from the same dough. And it's a very simple recipe, and it's something that we do kind of regularly around here. We wanted to use 3 different methods so that we could show you, according to the bunker principle, different ways that we could bake bread based on different elements, you know, whether it's sunny, whether it's windy, dark, whatever. And so that's what we decided to do. Sarah's going to bake a loaf, and Danielle's going to bake a loaf, and I'm going to bake a loaf. And you know, bread's been around since the beginning of recorded history, and I know right now, in the way things are, especially with social media and all that, bread itself can be a controversial subject, especially grains and all of the different arguments that you can hear about, you know, what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating. Here in Central Texas, grains are really a staple because they can be grown during the cool months. You can plant them during the fall, and you can harvest it in the spring. And so for someone who's living off grid, grains are really almost a no-brainer, kind of a go-to food source that can be stored for long periods of times and made relatively easily based on materials that are available right on the farm. Now, we've grown some large crops. We've grown up to 5 or 6 acres, harvested a lot of it by hand. Look up my video on threshing wheat with a treadle thresher. Actually, I'll put the link to it down in the comment section, or excuse me, in the description. So be looking for that. And so we've processed a lot of grains, and you know, we can process barley, wheat, rye, pretty much all really the same way. And so this makes it, you know, kind of, like I said, a no-brainer as far as being able to survive with very little money and not really that much input as far as work. There's a lot to the threshing, and there's a lot to grinding the wheat and those type of things, but as far as growing the product, it's really quite simple. All right, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to bake 3 loaves of bread. The recipe is very simple. There's only 4 ingredients, and that is wheat flour, yeast, water, and salt. I'm going to put up a list of the ingredients, and then we'll get started. You can probably see my big mistake here right from the very beginning. 8 cups of flour makes a lot of bread. It makes about 3 loaves, good sized loaves, and this bowl is, it's obviously not big enough for the amount of dough that I'm going to be making. However, still I persist. Now at some point here I actually look at it and I know this is not going to work, and I look under the cabinet for another bowl, but I don't see I want a wooden bowl, just because, you know, it's kind of like a period piece, and so I just keep going like a big dummy. I just keep going, and I make a little bit of a mess, but I do salvage it in the end. Here I'm adding the yeast, so it's 2 tablespoons of yeast to the 8 cups of flour. I've got the water there. I actually put the yeast in the warm water. It needs to be under 100 degrees to kind of get it activated and shake it up and give it some oxygen before I pour it in. And I add the salt as well, but you can see that I'm going to have a bit of a problem here pretty quick. And here we go. I'm still trying to figure out in my mind a way that this is going to work with the physics of the bowl. And so I make a depression into it, but this is not going to work. And I just keep going, even after it starts spilling. I still think it's going to make it. And then I realize it's not. And so we do, through the magic of the camera, we fix things. This needs to be stirred for about 10 minutes, and I do add a little bit more water to make up for the water that I lost. I kind of guesstimate how much got spilled, but you need to stir this for about 10 minutes. This is a no-knead bread, and so you don't need to spend a bunch of time kneading it, but you do want it to be completely incorporated. And I usually do the last little bit with my hands, so I put a little flour in my hands and kind of work it a little bit. And then it just goes into a container where it will sit for 2 hours covered. Okay, we're on our off-grid bread project, and basically we want to indicate how 3 different ways to make bread off-grid. We're going to use the same exact dough recipe, same exact dough that you saw me make earlier. We're going to divide it into 3 loaves, and we're going to cook it 3 different ways. Danielle here is going to use the solar oven, which earlier did not look very promising because it was very cloudy, but it's clear blue skies now. Maybe a little bit breezy, but that shouldn't affect it too much. A little late in the day though, so that could be iffy. Sarah is going to use the propane stove, which would work basically just like the wood stove, although the wood stove would have to be watched more carefully for temperature. And then I'm going to use the Dutch oven, and so I'm thinking the Dutch oven is probably going to turn out the worst. But so what we're going to do now is we're going to divide up the dough into 3 parts. We're going to let it rise for an hour, put it in our respective pans or however we're going to bake it, and then get going with the project. This is supposed to be a pretty wet and sticky dough, so don't add too much flour here. I put a little bit on my hands and sprinkled a little on the top while I kind of punched the bread down so we could cut it up. But don't add a lot of dough and flour, and don't work the bread a lot right here. Danielle's going to be cooking hers in a regular bread loaf pan, and Sarah's going to be cooking hers kind of ciabatta style on a cookie sheet, and I'm going to be cooking mine basically in a pie tin that'll be down in a Dutch oven. While the bread rises, I go outside of my little outdoor cooking area and start a little fire. Alright, Danielle's got the solar oven preheating, and it's reading about 3:30 right now. Probably got another 30-40 minutes before the bread can go in, but the solar oven's doing pretty good. Alright, so we're involved in our 3 bread off-grid cooking exercise, and you know, every day is different, every situation is different. If it's a sunny day like this and it's in the summer and it's hot like it is today, well, I got the worst job. I'm manning the fire for the Dutch oven version. Sarah's can be hot too. If it's hot in the cottage, you usually don't want to heat up the cottage during the summer. And then Danielle's probably got the best of it because she can sit in the shade and the sun does all the work. However, since it is so hot out here, I get a bonus, and that is from the last episode, some small beer to cool my thirst. Salud. Alright, I'm just getting my Dutch oven preheated. I don't have enough coals yet to cook, and it's probably in an hour before or more before I'll be able to cook. I need enough coals for the bottom of the pan to sit on and enough to put in the top. So I'm going to go ahead and get this pan, start this pan preheating now. Of course, it takes a lot longer to get a Dutch oven ready to go than it does the solar oven, which is almost instant, and the propane oven, which is pretty close. So I'm probably about 30 minutes to an hour behind them, but I'm going to go ahead and get some coals out here for the bottom and get this Dutch oven heating up on top of the coals, and then later on I'll bring the bread out and then we'll put the coals on top of the Dutch oven. So let me get some coals here. All right, we'll let that get up to temperature. And boy, is it hot. I think I'm gonna get a beverage. I gotta get my glass. Oh, a nice cool beverage. Woo! Tell them. This thing is poofy. Put a trivet between underneath the pie pan holding your bread, so it's between there and the Dutch oven at the bottom. I forgot to here at the very beginning, but like a few minutes later you can see the trivet over there by my foot. It's kind of the little metal owl, and I remembered it a few minutes later and I did put it back in there. But you definitely want to put something, a rock or a piece of metal or something between your pie tin or your pie pan and your Dutch oven, the bottom of your Dutch oven. The solar oven has to be checked regularly to make sure that it's pointing in the right direction and that it's at the right angle so that it maintains the appropriate heat. The Dutch oven needs to be rotated, the whole thing rotated about 90 degrees. I usually rotate the top the opposite direction, 15 to 20 degrees, every 10 or 15 minutes, just to make sure that it cooks evenly. And there's my bread. It's looking good. Nice brown crispy top. You want to have some oven mitts to reach in there and get this thing out of there, but the bread looks really, really good. You know, I think it looks pretty good. And now Sarah pulls her loaf out of the propane oven. Now it's Danielle's turn. All right, so we're done with our 3 bread off-grid cooking experiment exposition, and we ended up with 3 really good loaves of bread, although everything wasn't completely perfect. Most of it was my fault, but it came out good. This is our Dutch oven bread. Looking forward to cutting to that. We just had our supper. There was enough heat left in the Dutch oven to make supper in the Dutch oven, so we used Danielle's loaf, and it was delicious. So good. Oh my gosh. Get some butter on it. And then this is Sarah's, more like an artisanal ciabatta, and it came out great too. So we look forward to eating all these, and it worked out great. So that's the way that we do it.